Ra means the sun. In the eyes of the ancient Egyptians, the luminous circle in the sky most fully represented divine might and power, the all-pervading brightness that endows the world with life, spectacularly reborn in daily, endless cycles. Ra, the source of cosmic forces, the savior of the world from chaos. He wasn't an abstract, hidden creator god, whose nature would be explained by intricate theology like the Memphite Ptah or the Theban Amun, but visible to the naked eye, the sun, always present during the day, here and now, acting in the lives of mankind, constantly traveling on his bark across the expanse of the celestial ocean, from horizon to horizon. Other gods of Egypt couldn't therefore equal him. To become the great ones, they had to unite with him syncretically and become Montu-ra, amun-ra, Khnum-ra, etc. It was no different with the all-powerful early dynastic Horus, who, under the influence of Heliopolitan theology, which shaped the Egyptians' religiosity like no other, became Ra Horakhty, the solar king of gods with a falcon head, nobly personifying the majesty of the pharaohs, the main character of Egyptian myths. Ra is the source of Ma'at, the provider of the most precious force to the Egyptians, which keeps the cosmos in balance, maintains their social order, and is the way to the salvation of their souls. So they had to maintain a good relation with their god. In daily rituals, they returned mud to him, which he had previously given them. This crucial relation could be maintained only by the pharaoh, the intermediary between the creator and his creation. It was Ra who appointed pharaohs for this exact purpose, established the institution of the king on earth so that the pharaoh could feed him mud, do justice and thus sustain the work of creation. But when exactly and why did the solar cult become a royal cult? Hello everyone, my name's Irena. Welcome to my channel Ancient Sites Girl. I invite you to a podcast about the history of ancient Egypt. Today I'll try to tell you more about the vast subject of the cult of Ra, but I'll skip his role, undoubtedly decisive in the cult of the dead, widely undertaken in pharaonic funeral texts, as well as his role as the creator. Today we'll focus on Ra as the king of Egyptian gods, his kingship, clearly emphasized in ancient texts at least from the Pyramid Age to Roman times, as you'll soon find out. Perhaps as a result of a multi-generational process, around 3100 BC, political supremacy over the pre-dynastic states of Egypt was gained by the followers of Horus, Upper Egyptian rulers governing from the city of Thinis, located near present-day Abydos. Thus, the divine guardian of the conquerors, Horus, gained the status of a state and national deity, syncretically uniting with the main gods of other Egyptian regions. From then on, numerous local deities occupied various places in the new pantheon, with their rank, position in the divine hierarchy, being conditioned mainly by current political needs, as scholars today believe. One thing is certain, the first pharaohs lived by the idea of kingship centered on Horus in his heavenly and cosmic aspect. There is no clear evidence of the royal solar cult during the first dynasty, although after establishing the capital of the United Egypt in Memphis, the rulers were likely familiar with the religious tradition of nearby Heliopolis. Some researchers look for a progressive solarization of the court already in the second half of the first dynasty, analyzing the symbols that decorate the tombs of el-Kab, the royal necropolis of Abydos, among which appear solar discs, lions, and snakes. Snakes in particular are associated with the solar cult, both cobras with spread hoods, usually representing Uriae, and ordinary images of snakes, which can be interpreted as the primeval form of the creator ATUM, as well as the mythological defender of the solar bark traveling through the afterlife, the serpent Mehen, and even his opponent, APEP. According to some, the introduction of the solar cult at the court could have had such a significant influence on the entire state theology that it led to the shift from the first to the second Egyptian dynasty in the 29th century BC, that is at the time when the first cuneiform writing appeared in early dynastic Sumer. In these ancient times, Egyptian religion most likely enriched itself with new elements and lost some archaic features, like the custom of taking life of the royal retinue during the king's funeral. We know that 300 of King Jer's servants were buried along with him. The courtiers would still be buried near the tombs of their rulers, but they wouldn't have to immediately follow them to the land of the dead. On the other hand, the universal god Horus, personifying the king, acquires more and more solar features, becoming similar to the chief deity of Heliopolis, the demiurge ATUM. The close relation between the cult of the sun, that is Ra, and the institution of the pharaoh weren't fully confirmed historically until the time of the pyramids builders. However, the second ruler of the second dynasty placed the sun disk in his serek, that is in his Horus name, Neb-Ra. The meaning of his name divided Egyptologists. Ra is my lord, as it was thought until recently. Currently, the dominant view among researchers is that the king's name should be read as Lord of the Sun, so the pharaoh rules over the sun as a celestial body. Another pharaoh of the second dynasty is believed to identify with Ra directly, Nefer-Ka-Ra, whose name means beautiful soul of Ra, a name popular among rulers of later periods. Ra's position was ultimately strengthened by the first king of the third dynasty, the great Djoser, who perhaps as the first assumed the title of Golden Horus, used interchangeably with Golden Ra, as one of the 5 royal names alongside Serek, Nepti, or two ladies' name, throne name, and personal name. It was perhaps then that Horus gave Ra his falcon image, Ra Horakhty, that is, Ra who is Horus of the horizons, wears not the traditional double crown, pshent, but most often a large, red solar disk surrounded by the Uraeus serpent, the most important attribute of Ra. In this form, the Egyptians worshipped the syncretic unification of the falcon god with the solar creator from Iunu, where the sun was worshipped in its many aspects, including ATUM and Khepri. The city of Iunu, better known by its Greek name Heliopolis, that is, City of the Sun, was already one of the economic powers of Lower Egypt in pre-dynastic times, mainly due to its location at the crossroads of important trade routes, east-west leading from Asia and Sinai to the Nile Valley, as well as the north-south connecting the Delta and Upper Egypt. It was the capital of the 13th Lower Egyptian nome and perhaps the most important center of theological thought in pharaonic Egypt. The main object of worship of its inhabitants was a large, stocky stone pillar symbolizing the mythological primeval hill, Benben, the first land that emerged at the moment of creation of the universe. The pyramid texts mention it, quote, "O ATUM beetle, you became high as the hill, You rose up as the Benben stone in the Benben enclosure in Heliopolis. It's probable that the idea of recreating the cosmic primeval mound accompanied the first Thinite pharaohs, who over their tombs built earthen mounds resembling barrows. On the other hand, directly associated with the solar religion were pyramids, being somewhat a greater manifestation of the primeval mound. The first pyramid, and perhaps the oldest monumental stone building in history, was supposedly designed by Imhotep, the high priest of the sun in Heliopolis and a prominent courtier who probably held the position of Djoser's vizier. The construction of the step pyramid in Saqqara is a symbolic beginning of the Old Kingdom, the beginning of the Pyramid Age, and the supremacy of the sun god. Pyramids are the most monumental symbol of the solar cult. The largest and most magnificent, built during the 4th dynasty, were erected on the high hill, Gesher, in present-day Giza. They built their new tombs far to the north of the traditional Saqqara, thus much closer to Heliopolis. A coincidence? Pyramid is a Greek term. The Egyptians used their own names for each of them. For example, they called the Great Pyramid Akhat Khufu, that is Khufu's horizon. As a living god, an epiphany of the great god, Khufu created a tomb for himself that reflected the infinity of heaven, to which he wanted to return. The pyramid was built by the entire nation, mobilized around the cult of the ruler, and its completion was to lead to the final solar apotheosis, the complete merging of the king with the creator. Khufu's worshipper was his successor, Djedefre, whose name means enduring like Ra. During his short reign, he probably built the so-called Sphinx Temple, where he worshipped his deified father as Ra Horakhty, emerging from his horizon. Interestingly, during fieldwork in the Sphinx Temple, the American archaeologist Mark Lerner noticed that on the days of the summer solstice, the sun set exactly between the pyramids of Khafre and Khufu. This phenomenon, visible only from the Sphinx Temple, creates a real image of the Akhat, a term written with a hieroglyphic sign of the sun between two hills. Perhaps the two hills on which Egypt's two largest pyramids were built had long been associated with a solar cult. The mysterious Sphinx guards this place. It was supposedly built by, and certainly decorated with a face, of another of Khufu's sons, Khafre, whose name means appearing like Ra. Representing the dawn and the early morning sun, Horemakhet, that is Horus in the horizon, was the name by which the ancients called the Great Sphinx of Giza, a revered figure and a destination of pilgrimage for sun worshippers. The famous dream stele of Thutmose IV from the 14th century BC reveals the identity of the Sphinx, which, when visiting the prince in his dreams, introduces itself as follows: I am thy father, Horemakhet Khepri Ra ATUM. However, the sons of the god Khufu were unwilling or unable to follow in their father's footsteps, and both Djedefre and Khafre merely titled themselves Sons of the Sun, Sa-Ra. This epithet was adopted as part of the formal pharaonic title. It was also borne by Menkoire, whose name means eternal as the souls of Ra. But the last of the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty, Shepseskaf, seems to have tried to break with this tradition. According to some Egyptologists, he opposed the powerful clergy of Heliopolis, which was expressed by abandoning the solar Giza and erecting an archaic mastaba in the traditional royal necropolis at Saqqara. Shepseskaf's concerns were justified. After his death, the throne was taken over by the high priest of Ra, Usarkaf. During the 5th dynasty, the great state construction projects associated almost exclusively with the funeral cult of the pharaohs were abandoned in favor of serving the cult of Ra, a cult that had reached its apogee at that time. The new rulers opted for smaller pyramids in Saqqara and Abu Sir, placing greater emphasis on the construction of monumental temples of the sun. The sun temples and the idea behind the construction of these mysterious structures still haven't been fully deciphered, always on the western bank of the Nile, of an almost funeral nature. The most famous and largest was built by Nusra-ini, the 6th king of the 5th dynasty, whose name means "possessed of the power of Ra." Its scarce remains can still be admired in Abu Ghurab. Architecturally, they must have resembled the well-preserved to this day valley temple of Khafre from the 4th dynasty, with the difference that they weren't only a spectacular gate to the funerary complex, but were actual places of permanent worship. Wide-open courtyards surrounded by granite pillars, monumental alabaster altars, and massive obelisks in the center. Their design would be imitated 1,000 years later by the heretic king Akhenaten, who built his own temples of the sun. The Old Kingdom fell in dramatic circumstances in the 22nd century BC. The Dark Age of the First Intermediate Period was also a time of decline of the national solar cult. The restoration of the old order was advocated by the Middle Kingdom authors of the didactic texts. The Egyptians turning away from the cult of the sun in times of political crisis was supposed to result in a deficit of Ma'at, which resulted in a general catastrophe. In their opinion, the sun was responsible for the drought and low flooding of the Nile. Civil war, nomadic invasions, famine, and anarchy are the result of the Egyptians turning away from the Creator and his law. Shaped by this turmoil, the prophecy of Neferti from the late 20th century BC shows the terrible consequences of Egypt's breaking its ties with Ma'at and the sun god. Modern religious scholars value it as a unique early example of prophetic literature, as the description of the catastrophe is put into the mouth of the sage Neferti, who recounts it to King Snefru, who had reigned around 400 years before the events described. We read, "In what dread state is this land? The sun is obscured and gives no light that men may see. Men cannot live when storm clouds hover, and all are stunned in its absence. I shall speak only what is before my face. I shall not foretell what will not come to pass. The river of Egypt is empty, and the waters may be crossed on foot. Men search for water that the ships may sail, but the watercourse has become a river bank. Foreign birds will breed in the delta marshes, having made their nests beside the people, for men have let them approach through laxness. As for Ra, he has withdrawn himself from man. He will rise at the appointed time. None will know when noon has come. None will behold his shadow. None will rejoice when he is seen. No longer will the eyes stream with water when looking at him, for he will be in the sky, only like the moon." It was the warrior rulers from the south who restored order and unity to the country. Having established the capital in their native Thebes, the pharaohs of the 11th dynasty restored the state cult of Ra, combining it with the patron of their dynasty, Amun. Significantly, the prenomen, that is, throne names of the rulers of the Middle Kingdom, were always accompanied by Ra's name. Among them we have, for example, Nupkaure, that is, golden are the souls of Ra, Amenemhat II, Nimat-Ra, that is, belonging to the justice of Ra, throne name of Amenemhat III, and Kakaura, appearance of the souls of Ra, forename of the 12th dynasty king, Senusret III. These great rulers of the Middle Kingdom knew that in order to restore the divine law, they had to start from the beginning, draw from the source. But what was actually at the beginning? In the main temple of Heliopolis, called ATUM, during the Old Kingdom the most popular cosmogonic doctrine was invented, relating to the creation and development of the visible world, in which the main role was played by the solar deity Ra-Atum Khepri. According to solar theologians, Atum floated inertly on the endless, dark waters of the cosmic primordial ocean Nun, as an incomplete being, unaware of its existence. As a result of a mysterious impulse, this being awakens, creating a reference point materializing the primeval hill, the Benben Mound, emerging from the waters of chaos. This is the moment when the explosion of creation occurs, Zeb Tepi. The self-reproducing god gives birth to the first pair, Shu and Tefnut. Atum embraces them, passing on to them the vital essence, his Ka, the spiritual power that his children will then pass on to every living being. The appearance of light and warmth heralds the birth of the sun, a spectacular emanation of Atum. The first sun rising on the horizon of the primordial hill was called Khepri, that is, the one who becomes. The sun, Ra, is therefore inseparable from Atum. Ra is his shape, the form of the supreme god. The role of the great god, the demiurge amun-ra Khepri, is to somewhat extract existence from the primordial waters of chaos and to set the path of its development. The further salvific activity of Ra is expressed primarily in the establishment of Ma'at, cosmic order, which is an effective barrier separating the orderly, bright world from the darkness of chaos surrounding it on all sides. Without the solar Ra, all life is impossible. The world therefore owes its existence and duration to his light. Ma'at comes out of him and fills the entire world with life and light, truth and justice. During the first time, the sun god releases Heka, the untamed creative power identified with life and with the male element of creation, that is with Shu, brother of Tefnut. Ma'at, on the other hand, is an ordering force, shaping the dynamically emerging cosmos. In iconography, she is often depicted as a woman, with an ostrich feather on her hand, because she is identified with the primordial female element, that is, with the first goddess, Tefnut. Ma'at is therefore, first and foremost, the daughter of the sun god. She was also called the breath of Ra, which he lives every day. Ma'at was the patroness of the era of ancient Egyptians. It was from their faith in her that their conservatism and fear of change came. Guarding the constancy of the order of Ma'at was considered the main duty of kings, as well as a universal commandment binding on all people. Transgression of Ma'at was a sin, the consequences of which affected a person both in this world and in the afterlife. The main god of this religion of Ma'at was Ra, titled Lord of Ma'at, the one who lives Ma'at, who is perfected through Ma'at, with whose forehead Ma'at unites, and above all, the one who feeds on Ma'at. The offering completes the circle, delivering back to God Ma'at that came from him in the form of the vital essence Ka. This mysterious process is described in one of the tombs of the 18th dynasty. O Ra, who gives birth to Ma'at, to him Ma'at is brought as an offering. Give Ma'at to my heart, that I may raise it to your Ka. I know that you feed on it, you are the one who created her body. Ra, as the creator of justice, rewards good deeds, but not because of mercy, compassion, or special providence that he extends over humanity, but because of his very nature, as the demiurge-generating Ma'at. But it seems that there was never enough Ma'at. The Egyptians believed that if the work of creation was to continue, cosmic balance and social order was to be maintained, they had to give back the god Ma'at he had previously given them. In this never-ending cycle, Ma'at circulated between humanity and God. This process could only continue thanks to the pharaoh, an irreplaceable intermediary in the whole process. Ma'at doesn't return to the sun god by itself, but must be brought to him. The duty of the one who brings Ma'at is symbolically fulfilled by Thoth, who personifies wisdom, but also by the Theban deity, Onuris, whose name, one who leads back the distant one, refers to this very role. The king fulfills the divine duty of Thoth or Onuris. He is the one who brings Ma'at. The bringing of Ma'at is the essence of the offering by which man, and specifically the king as the representative of all men, responds to divine action. Bringing it, offering Ma'at to the sun god, is therefore the most important of all actions that can come from men in this world, and the king's primary role. This is a concept that, coming from the solar cult, has spread to other theological traditions. In iconography, Ma'at is offered to the god in the form of a symbol, a feather or a sitting woman, which is kissed, inhaled, or eaten by Ra. The main element of the solar cult is recitations. More than half of the countless hymns that have survived from ancient Egypt are solar hymns. There is no other deity for whom so many cult texts were created. The adoration prayer that maintains the course of the sun was perceived by the Egyptians as an offering of Ma'at. Also an ordinary person, as it was believed, by speaking Ma'at, that is, by testifying the truth and acting morally, could join in this cosmic process. The Egyptians perceived the cosmos not so much as a place, but as a process fully manifested in the journey of the sun across the sky. The solar hymns, the cultic recitation, the so-called verbal offering served to maintain the course of the sun and thus to sustain the work of creation. The Egyptians believed that the institution of the king was established by the sun god to realize Ma'at among people and to repel its opposite, Isfet. In short, God uses the pharaoh as an intermediary to maintain the existence of the world. The pharaoh is the great priest of the sun. He is authorized to exercise power by the fact that the sun god has exalted him and entrusted him with numerous duties. One of the inscriptions in Hatshepsut's mortuary temple states, Ra has set up the king on the earth of the living forever and ever, to speak justice to the people, to satisfy the gods, for the generation of Ma'at, for the destruction of Isfet. He, the king, gives the divine offerings to the gods, and mortuary offerings to the transfigured. The name of the king is in heaven, like that of Ra. He lives in joy, like Ra Horakhty. Hatshepsut, whose throne name was Ma'at, Ma'at is the soul of Ra, also claims, "I made great Ma'at that he loves, for I recognized that he feeds on it. It is also my nourishment. I swallow its dew so that I become one body with him." Feeding on Ma'at, therefore, belongs to the role of both the king and the sun god. Feeding on Ma'at makes them equal, makes them one. The exercise of power, the defeat of chaos, and the establishment of order. Kingship, in a word, was also a process in the eyes of the Egyptians, which can be compared to the cycle of life, the constant cycle of birth and death of the King of Kings, the divine Ra, took place before their eyes every day. Ra, formed in the womb of his heavenly mother Nut, at dawn passes through her birth canal and is born in Akhat, emerging on the horizon as his childlike primeval form, symbolized by the scarab, Khepri, the one who becomes. Although the appearance of the sun disk in the morning means victory over death, the young god is still vulnerable to attacks by demonic forces, especially the personification of the active, aggressive aspect of chaos, the serpent APEP. However, as he ascends, he gains strength. The majestic midday sun, in all its power, is represented by the falcon-headed Ra Horakhty triumphing over his enemies. Armed with his eye, the serpent Urias, Ra is commanding respect, king of the gods, but also a strict judge. The power of the sun at its zenith can be dangerous to the living, as anyone who's visited Egypt, especially in the summer, has probably learned. Over time, however, Ra becomes gentler, sailing further west, aging and weakening. At this stage he was often shown as an old ATUM leaning on his staff, a tired old man who dies at sunset, crimsoning the sky with his blood. He enters the underworld as a dead god during the new kingdom called Osiris-Ra. The epic journey of the dead sun begins with a change of means of transport, from a day bark called Manjet to a nocturnal bark, Mesektet, on which he'll travel 12 hours of night. The Egyptians, certain about the watery nature of the heavens, placed the wandering sun in a boat, similarly to the rest of the celestial bodies, navigating constantly in the sky. Ra traveling through the waters of Duat is the main, most important motif of Egyptian funeral books. Since I've already dedicated other podcasts to his nocturnal journey, I'll skip it now. The sun god rules from his bark, similarly to the pharaohs who often traveled through the kingdom, especially right after ascending the throne. Such a royal ritual journey at the beginning of the reign is made, for example, by the last ruler of the 18th dynasty, Horemheb, after his coronation in Thebes around 1319 BC. He compares himself to the sun god, quote, "Flowing downstream, his majesty has the image of Horakhty. See, he created this land and brought order into it, as Ra does." Compared to the divine boat of millions of years, that is Manjet, the royal boats were instruments of the pharaoh's rule, symbols of their power. They played a particularly important role in the early dynastic times, when there still was no integrated bureaucratic system governing nomes. In order to maintain control over the young empire, the kings had to constantly travel along the Nile. Perhaps it was then that Egyptian ideas about the course of the sun as a reflection of events on earth were defined. The exercise of power by the first pharaohs must have meant above all struggle, overcoming obstacles, emerging from crisis, fighting the enemy. Ra has to rule in even more difficult conditions, as we learn from the funeral texts. The pharaoh identifies himself with Ra even after death, so he shares with him the mythical journey across the ocean of the sky. We don't know whether the numerous boats buried in Abydos and Saqqara with the early dynastic kings referred to the solar cult, but this connection is undeniable in the case of boats found in the pyramid complexes of the Old Kingdom. Of course, the most spectacular example is the miraculously preserved Khufu ship, a 43-meter-long vessel built of Lebanese cedar, discovered in 1954 in one of the boat pits on the east side of the Great Pyramid. As we already know, spreading the divine order and balance of Ma'at was the priority of the king of the gods. So the iconographic representations of the solar bark show Ma'at as his companion. Ma'at guides the sun god, opens his paths, standing on the prow of his bark, thus enabling the movement of the sun, and appears shining on his forehead. Already in the coffin text of the Middle Kingdom we read, "It is Isis who is on his forehead as Ma'at, showing him the way as he crosses the sky. Her own image is the eye of Ra." Symbolizing Ma'at, the daughter of Ra is also an active force maintaining order, an instrument of divine wrath subordinate to the will of her father, the vengeance of God that punishes sinners. In this role she is called his eye, or more specifically, the eye of Ra. Tamed in the form of a uraeus guarding the solar disk on the head of the god and the royal crown, she guards the kingdom as the Cobra Wadjet. When she becomes a vengeful lioness, the powerful one, that is Sekhmet, even the creator has no control over her, for she is said to be more powerful than the gods. In such a terrifying form, we meet the daughter of the sun in one of the most popular solar myths, or rather in its many versions, differing significantly from each other. However, the common element of the story of the so-called wandering goddess or returning goddess is the motive of rebellion and departure of the daughter from her father, the sun god. She could be any of the numerous local Egyptian goddesses called Daughter of the Sun in a given period, like Tefnut, Hathor, Horit, Bastet, Nekbat, Mut, or Isis. The myth is the reason of one of the most important festivities, the celebration of the return of the wandering goddess. It seems to be always held around the summer solstice and the heliacal rising of Sirius, when the annual flooding of the Nile was expected. Most often we find Tefnut or another goddess returning from the south, from the African ends of the world known to ancient Egyptians. This is naturally the direction from which the expected flooding of the Nile comes. One of the most popular versions of the myth is written in Demotic script on the Leiden Papyrus I from the 2nd century AD, so already from Roman times. It tells of the times when Horakhty personally ruled on the earth. He was pleased with his work, and most of all with his beloved daughter Tefnut. Thanks to her, everything went as it should and everything was in its proper place. One day, however, for unknown reason, this beloved daughter took offense at her father and fled to distant Nubia. There, Tefnut took the form of a lioness or a panther and spread terror among all living things. In Egypt, which had been so far well organized, all the laws of nature broke down. The terrified king of the gods, Ra, sent wise Thoth, the ruler of Hermopolis, in the form of a small baboon to search for his beloved child. Thoth tried to psychologically influence the goddess's behavior by telling her moralizing anecdotes. Among them, we learn interesting information about the nature of Ra's rule. Quote, "I have told you this story so that you may be convinced that nothing is hidden from Ra, the radiant god, the avenger of the gods. He takes vengeance on everything that is on earth, starting from the flea, the smallest of all living things, until his punishment reaches the griffin, the largest of all living things. The good and the evil that is done on earth will be repaid by Ra. That is to say, even though you may say that I am smaller than you in size, Ra will treat me the same as you. His smell and his hearing extend to everything that is on earth. He sees what's in the egg when it's still growing. Whoever opens an egg is like someone who kills. Their sin can never be washed away. If you think that is a lie, look at the trace of blood that's still on your clothes. This is the blood of the wicked persons who committed murder, but it wasn't repaid during their lifetime. When they died, their remains were sought out to exact vengeance on them after their death. The clothing of the gods as well as of men bears the trace of their blood, so that our hearts may rejoice in the knowledge that the avenger always pronounces his punishment on the guilty." Of course, as all versions of the myth, this one ends with a happy ending. The goddess returns home and to her original form, making Ra full of joy. A much older myth concerning the Eye of Ra is a New Kingdom composition entitled The Book of the Heavenly Cow. Its oldest version was found in the tomb of the 18th dynasty ruler Tutankhamun. By the way, his throne name was Neb-Keperu-Ra, Lord of the Manifestations is Ra. According to the book, the ruler of the earth, Ra, old and weak, learns of a conspiracy hatched against him by mankind. He fears that he will no longer command respect or have power over humanity. So he summons all the gods to a meeting in his palace and orders them to speak on the matter. Quote, "Once it came to pass under the majesty of Ra, the self-generated god, that when he had been in the kingship over mankind and the gods combined, mankind proceeded to contrive a plot against the person of Ra. Now that his majesty had grown old, his bones being of silver, his flesh of gold, and his hair of genuine lapis lazuli. His majesty became aware of the plot being contrived against him by mankind, and so his majesty said to those who were his retinue, 'Please, summon to me my Eye, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, and Nut, as well as the fathers and mothers who were in my company when I was in Nun.' First he turned to his forefather, the personification of the primeval ocean, Nun. Quote, 'O eldest god, in whom I originated, and you, ancestral gods, see, mankind who originated from my eye has contrived a plot against me. Tell me what you would do about this, since I am seeking a solution. I cannot slay them until I have heard what you might have to say about this.' In response, Nun advised him to send against the culprits the solar eye, which was to annihilate the entire ungrateful human race, to which Ra replied, quote, 'See, they have fled into the desert, their hearts fearful over what I might say to them. Then they said unto his majesty, Send out your eye, that it may smite them for you, those who have conspired so wickedly. No eye is as capable as it to smite them for you. May it descend in the form of Hathor.' Ra himself doesn't commit any acts of violence. Instead, he commands his eye to do it for him. Hathor, his father's capricious favorite, immediately transformed her charming form into the lion-like Sekhmet, and began slaughtering the impudent people. Egypt was almost completely depopulated, and the fearsome lioness drove the remnants into the desert. Then the king of the gods felt sorry for them, so he said to his daughter, "Go in peace, Hathor, for you have fulfilled your task." Unfortunately, once the ruler's order was given, it couldn't be stopped. The furious lioness Sekhmet didn't abandon her terrifying form and rushed as far as the city of Nenesut, which the Greeks later called Heliopolis, her feet immersed in human blood. Finally exhausted, she fell asleep. Ra then sent messengers to the area of today's Aswan, ordering them to bring as much red ochre as possible. Then he ordered the stone to be ground into powder and mixed with barley, from which the servants made beer in as many as 7,000 jugs. The liquid prepared in this way looked like blood. Then Ra ordered it to be spilled on the root of the bloodthirsty Sekhmet. When the goddess woke up, she immediately set out to find humans, but came across a huge red puddle. So she began to drink from it until she got totally wasted. Intoxicated, she forgot her terrible task and transformed into Hathor with a sweet face. She went away staggering and singing, and the king of the gods was very pleased. "Welcome, darling," he said. And to commemorate this event, he established in the city of Dendera a great festival of joy and drinking, which was celebrated annually. This myth conveys in vivid form the Egyptian explanation of a very real phenomenon, the flood and its connection with the country's geography. For the Egyptians, the desert is a place of chaos, and those who have taken refuge there are rebels of the cosmic order, among them the foreign Bedouin tribes nomadic in the Egyptian deserts. The Eye of Ra represents the deadly, destructive heat of the sun, which makes life in the desert impossible. Its containment is the return of Ma'at to the Nile Valley, the beautiful and gentle goddess who heralds the flood. This takes place in the height of summer, when the heat is at its maximum. Interestingly, when the flood entered Egypt, it carried at first reddish mud. The rest of the aforementioned Book of the Heavenly Cow refers to another important thread from which it takes its name. The hardships with gods and people finally exhausted old Ra, so he decided to ascend into the sky for a well-deserved rest. Quote, "Then said the majesty of Ra, as I live for myself, my heart is too weary to remain with them, that I should slay them to the very last one. The reach of my arm shall in no way diminish." What the gods who were in his retinue said, "Don't withdraw in your weariness, for you still have power over what you desire." The majesty of this god then said to the majesty of Nun, "My body is weak for the first time. I won't wait until another gets to me." Despite the protests of his retinue, he didn't let himself be dissuaded, so he ordered his son Shu to take over the earthly rule, and he asked the sky goddess Nut to transform herself into a huge cow, on which he then mounted, intending to fly into the firmament. When the people saved by his kindness saw that the wise ruler was leaving them, they were overcome with sadness and tried to stop him, taking up arms against the rebels who had saddened the heart of the Creator. However, Ra wouldn't change his mind. Then he rose into the air. When Nut was frightened by the great height, he ordered his son, the god of Shu, to hold her up. Quote, "The majesty of Ra said, 'O my son Shu, place yourself under my daughter Nut, and watch over for me the two groups of infinite ones there, so that they may live in the twilight. Place her over your head and nurture her." From then on he never returned to earth, and traveled the upper daytime sky from east to west in the morning boat, shining for the living, and the lower nighttime sky from west to east in the evening boat, shining for the dead. The rule on earth was now taken over by Shu, supported by the vizier, the wise Thoth. But Shu's rule was far from peaceful. The gods, dissatisfied with his weakness, forced him to abdicate. The new ruler of the earthly world was Geb, the son of Shu, and after him Osiris. It's worth mentioning that these mythological stories, not always flattering towards Ra, burdened with weakness and making mistakes, were created during the New Kingdom, at a time of serious changes that were taking place in Egyptian religiosity. Amun-ra remained the main state deity for 500 years of the New Kingdom, apart from the Amarna period, of course, when his cult fell victim to Akhenaten's religious persecution. During this revolution, with varying intensity, lasting around a dozen years, led from Akhenaten in today's Amarna, Akhenaten established a new cult of the single, impersonal, solar god, Aten. Temples of other gods were closed, and a great iconoclastic action was initiated, the destruction of images of deities and removal of their names. Only the Heliopolitan Ra, identified with Aten, and other symbols strongly associated with the old solar cult remained, although at one stage even the use of the word gods was banned. Although in post-Amarna Egypt a renaissance of solar worship continued, the gods' former absolute authority seemed to have been somewhat diminished. This is especially evident in the famous Ramessid text recorded on the Chester Beatty papyrus. This is an extremely colorful and lightly described story, another version of the most popular at that time Osirian myth. It deals with the many years of legal struggles between Horus and the slayer of his father Osiris, Seth, who usurped the Egyptian throne. As we know, this war for succession divided the gods. Interestingly, ATUM and Khepri, traditionally identified with Ra, appear in this story not only as separate, independent deities, but even stand on the opposite side of the dispute. While most of the gods were clearly in favor of the young Horus, demanding that he should sit on the throne, Horakhty, presiding over the tribunal, wasn't about to comply with their will. First of all, the king of the gods saw their demands as an attempt by the younger generations of deities to pressure and undermine his authority. And secondly, Seth had long been his favorite, a companion on his nocturnal journeys through the afterlife, and a defender of the solar bark, repelling the attacks of the sun's eternal enemy, the serpent APEP. In a sudden fit of anger, Ra even compared Horus to a helpless suckling whose mouth stinks of milk. Quote, "The universal Lord became furious at Horus and told him, 'Thou art feeble in thy limbs, and this kingly office is too great for thee, thou stripling the taste of whose mouth is bad.'" This caused outrage among the tribunal, and one of the minor gods, Babi, dared to do something unheard of. He threw an insult in the face of the chairman. "Thy shrine is empty," he said. The insulted Horakhty left the assembly and took refuge in his residence. Quote, "And the great god passed a day lying upon his back in his arbor, and his heart was very sore, and he was alone." The upset god was appeased by his cheerful daughter Hathor, who unexpectedly exposed to him part of her divine body. This grotesque and bizarre display improved the god's mood. We read, "And after a long time, Hathor, the lady of the southern sycamore, came and stood before her father, the master of the universe, and she uncovered her nakedness before his face, and the great god laughed at her. Thereupon he rose up, and he sat down with the great Ennead, and he said unto Horus and Seth, Speak concerning yourselves. The dispute was far from being resolved, for Horus's father, the already powerful ruler of the afterlife, Osiris, joined the process. The correspondence between them reveals another new conflict regarding power, and Ra's position in the face of new circumstances seems to be weakening, which somewhat illustrates the situation the pharaohs found themselves in during the New Kingdom. Quote, Thereupon he answered it very quickly unto the place where the master of the universe was together with the Ennead, saying, Wherefore shall my son Horus be defrauded, seeing that it is I who make you strong, and it is I who made the barley and the spelt to nourish the gods, and even so the living creatures after the gods. And no god, nor any goddess, found himself out to do it. And Ra Horakhty said, Answer thou for me this letter very quickly unto Osiris, and speak unto him in respect of this letter. Suppose thou hadst never come into existence, suppose thou hadst never been born, the barley and the spelt would still exist. Thereupon the letter of the Master of the Universe reached Osiris, and it was read out before him. In response, Osiris resorts to direct threats against his opponents. Quote, As for the land in which I am, it is filled with savage-faced messengers, who do not fear any god or any goddess. I have but to let them go forth, and they will fetch the heart of whoever commits misdeeds, and they will be here with me. Indeed, what is the meaning of my happening to be here, resting in the west, while you are all outside? Who among you is there that is mightier than I? Osiris openly threatened to take the entire assembly to the underworld if it continued to insult the principles of decency and justice. Even the chairman of the trial, Ra Horakhty, bowed to such an argument. Horus was immediately equipped with all the insignia of power and crowned Lord of the Two Lands. Here is Ra, the eternal king of the gods, creator of the universe and source of Ma'at, who was for his faulty judgments reprimanded, humiliated, and finally succumbed to threats. He lost despite who he is. Unbelievable. Although the contendings of Horus and Seth is certainly not a serious religious text, it sheds light on the changes that were taking place in Egyptian culture, changes that inevitably led to the decline of the solar cult. The Greeks who visited and settled Egypt in large numbers in the late period never paid much attention to Heliopolis and this rather distant from their culture solar cult. Devastated by the Persians, Heliopolis was never fully rebuilt by the Ptolemies, and by Roman times it had already fallen into ruin. An interesting account was left to us by the Greek geographer Strabo from the 1st century BC, who visited the Nile Delta. Quote, There too is Heliopolis, situated upon a large mound. It contains a temple of the sun and the ox Mnevis, which is kept in a sanctuary and is regarded by the inhabitants as a god, as Apis is regarded by the people of Memphis. In front of the mount are lakes, into which the neighboring canal discharges itself. At present, the city is entirely deserted. It has an ancient temple constructed after the Egyptian manner, bearing many proofs of the madness and sacrilegious acts of Cambyses, who did very great injury to the temples, partly by fire, partly by violence, mutilating in some cases and applying fire in others. There's also a building with a great number of pillars, as at Memphis in the barbaric style, for except the magnitude and number of rows of pillars, there is nothing pleasing nor easily described, but rather a display of labor wasted. Heliopolis is now a district of Cairo, and almost nothing remains of the ancient city and its sacred buildings, except for a solitary 20-meter obelisk from the 12th dynasty. The ancient cult of Ra Horakhty ATUM Khepri, unlike other local solar cults, seems to have been fading away even before the Christianization of Egypt. It was the Osirian traditions that, till the very end, didn't lose their popularity. So, in the end, it's Osiris, Ra's greatest rival, who wins the competition for the hearts and minds of the Egyptians. I hope you learned something new about the beliefs of ancient Egyptians. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Ra, check out my podcasts about ATUM, APEP, and Ra in the Land of the Dead, linked below. Please let me know in the comments what you'd like to hear about next time. I'd also like to thank all my patrons. I truly appreciate your contribution. If you don't support me yet, but would like to, I placed my Patreon link below in the description. Don't forget to like my video and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye, and see you on the next one.